Mari's a perfect host for this panel, as she's straddled the world of both startups and the large corporate world. On her team at Nokia, she grew a back-of-the-napkin idea about location-based applications and services into a team of over 100 people working with over 10 million users. And now she's co-founder and CEO of SNAZZ, which is an event marketing and promotional platform for businesses. So she's really come from a few different realms. One thing that you have in common in all of those circumstances is that you're working with a board of directors. It's not just you and not just your team, but also working with others. So she's the perfect fit for this, and we're really happy to have her. Thanks again.
Thanks, Cheryl, for a very generous introduction. It's great to be here. Thanks, everybody, for coming once again. Personally, I'm very happy to see the topic of managing boards on Oric's Founders Guide series. I think it's a topic that is very important, and it doesn't get its share of limelight often. And for founders, mastering the craft of managing your board can make a huge difference, not only when the company's doing well and moving things around, but also when you're encountering difficulties, setbacks, challenges. And for those of you who don't work with boards or don't plan to do so in the near future, I think the topic is still really relevant, because at the end of the day, it's really all about managing up. And we have a great panel tonight of entrepreneurs and investors. They all spend a significant amount of their time and energy around topics related to boards, managing their boards, sitting on boards, actually running board meetings, and knowing everything inside out about the topic. So very excited to have you guys tonight. And what we'll do is that we'll have a conversation for about 45 minutes. We'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. And to get us started, I'm going to ask our panelists to briefly introduce themselves.
Great, thanks. Hi, I'm Ellie Wheeler. I'm a venture capitalist at Greycroft here in New York. Greycroft's an early stage venture capital firm based between New York and Los Angeles. So we spend probably 90% of our time investing at the Series A. So that's anywhere from $500,000 to $5 million from us. And excuse me. We are investing across anything internet or mobile enabled, so really a broad swath, and kind of geography agnostic. But we don't actually have a board seat as a prerequisite for the companies that we work with, which is really somewhat different than a lot of venture firms. But we will always at least be a board observer and end up on the boards in about probably half of circumstances because we've been asked to.
Hi, I'm Danielle Weinblatt. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Take the Interview. Take the Interview is a B2B software solution that helps organizations hire better people faster. We've implemented our software into over 100 enterprises to date. That includes CVS, so heads up to our client whose building we're in, NBC Universal, Time, CIAA, CREF, Kaplan, a series of major enterprises here in New York and internationally. I'm into my 4th year in this role, which is kind of exciting. I am the chairman of the board, as well as obviously a board member. Have had experiences observing boards as well. So prior to co-founding Take the Interview, I was actually in private equity. So I did later stage investing, so very similar to Ellie, but for bigger check sizes. So typically call it 10 million to 100 million. And I was an associate on a lot of those deals. So I was a board observer for 6 different portfolio companies, so saw a lot of interesting things in my experience. So it's kind of cool because I've had experience both being on a board, observing boards of later stage companies, and also forming an advisory board. So hopefully this will be interesting to everybody today.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Swirnow. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Sherpaa. Our goal is to make healthcare accessible and affordable for businesses and their employees. So we are also B2B. Essentially, we create a corporate medical practice in the cloud that's powered by doctors and insurance navigators who are both hired full-time by us. again, just to keep costs low, kind of a perk that pays for itself.
Thanks. Let's start with the broad topic first and open this up to the panel. What is the role of the board?
Who wants to start?
Sure.
Sure. I mean, you could go on about this for a while, but it's, general governance and oversight. So there are, obviously Sarbanes-Oxley, but we're not going to go into that, and we've got lawyers in the room who can give you specifics, but it would put everyone to sleep, so we'll keep it more high level. It really is, we're going to talk about structure later, but it's the body that is in charge and making sure that the governance of the company is well structured, that there are checks and balances, and that there's fiduciary responsibilities, and you have a fiduciary duty as a board member to all of the shareholders of the company. So that typically involves hiring and firing a CEO, making sure that you are solvent. Because when there are edge cases in any of these circumstances, if a company is going to go bankrupt, if there is fraud, you're actually, you're liable as a board, and that's why, D&O insurance is something that everybody has. But, it goes both ways. There are responsibilities and very specific responsibilities as a board member, and then as a group that you have for all shareholders.
Sure. I'll build on that. So not only do they do all those things in checks and balances, oftentimes you have a board that gets involved in major strategic issues, as well as big expenditures. So, I would consider adding an executive to the exec team who's paid over certain thresholds, or signing a very long-term lease, or making enormous capital expenditures if you're a company that needs to do that. Those are typical issues that are brought up to the board for both discussion and hopefully some type of resolution. And then inside of boards, they have committees. Hopefully this isn't too elementary for you guys. I'm sure you know all this. But things like compensation committees and audit committees. So typically the compensation committee is a subset of the board, or typically, in my case, I have a 5-person board, so it's pretty much everybody but me, because my compensation is determined by that committee. So basically, your comp committee would determine the compensation and bonuses of your executive team members. So call it C-level executives, sometimes VP level executives, and then obviously the audit committee. They are feared sometimes, but they're really there to, again, provide checks and balances, to work with the auditors to make sure that your financial statements are being reported in accordance with GAAP and all those other fun things. Yes, so that is some of the other fundamental things.
Yeah, there's a ton. There's an entire section in the documents for, what needs to come up to the board and what doesn't, not to mention just general kind of strategic advice and, a lot of back and forth and hiring key executives and a lot of things, actually.
So if we dial back from having all your, firing on all cylinders, having lots of different committees and, different responsibilities, to when you're still an early stage company, and, and what point then, Cheryl, does it start making sense to start thinking about having outside board members?
We added our first non-investor board member in November of last year. So we felt it was important I felt it was important to get objective advice. We're all on a team together. That's the way that I approach the board. But obviously our investors also have their own boards that they're reporting to. So it was important, as a first-time CEO, especially to a growing company, it was important that I had somebody that was truly objective, that could give good advice and could help me to make good decisions and help us to collectively make good decisions and perhaps give a different perspective.
And was that related to financing round, or was that outside of that?
No, it was outside. It was just related to kind of strategic decisions we were making within the company. And so it was important that we got somebody that, that again could provide guidance and just additional insights.
Yeah. So how do you pick a board, Danielle? I mean, even the luckiest of entrepreneurs, they don't get money from everybody, right? So when you get your investors, how do you think about, who should I have on my board, and how is that going to affect my company?
So I've been debating this back and forth. So we do have a 5-person board, of which 2 seats are typically management. In my case, it's one of the founding team members, and then 2 are our venture capital investors. And then we have a 5th. We have an independent seat. So, we've kind of gone back and forth because we're in the human resource software business. Is this a practitioner? So is this someone that really understands the industry, can bring relationships to the table, or should it be more of an operator? So someone who has run another enterprise software company in the HR space in a similar capacity. I think right now the inclination is to bring that independent board member on as an operator, and I think it's for similar reasons to provide me with advice, mentorship, to be able to show me what the road truly is and what it entails in order to take a company from founding to exit.
Cheryl, would you like to comment on that? You guys have...
I'm in total agreement. We're in pretty much the exact same. I have a 5-person board made up exactly the same way. So completely agree. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk about another role on the board, which is observers. And Danielle and Ellie, you both said you've actually been on a number of boards as an observer. Observers are interesting. They don't sit at the main table, but they're in the room. When the company's doing well, everybody wants a piece of that. So how do you control the discussion? How do you get value out of the observers as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So I think this is very different between early stage and later stage, because I also did later stage. I think it's largely irrelevant whether someone's on the board or an observer at the earliest stages. The reality is it's not a 2-2 vote and someone's breaking it with a tie. That just doesn't happen. And not to mention that, it's just you're not adding a tremendous amount of extra value by being on the audit committee of a Series A company. Because again, there really isn't one. It's everyone, it's everything. It's not coming down to that. So at the early stage, it really doesn't matter. And if people want to show up and help and you get their Rolodex and you get their strategic input and they've got relevant experience, great. You might have an outlier case where someone's disruptive, but you might have that whether they're on the board or not. And that's actually, in terms of the most important thing for picking a board, it's, kind of first rule is do no harm. It's actually very difficult to get rid of board members, or it can be difficult to get rid of board members, and that's a big mistake you can make. In terms of, I don't worry about that. There's a lot of things that you can worry about on a day-to-day basis as an entrepreneur. Managing your observer situation is just not one of them.
Yeah, I would totally agree. We have one observer on our board, super helpful, and is non-disruptive and somebody that we welcome for additional insights. And
it's funny. On a lot of our companies, they can't actually accurately name who's on the board and who's an observer.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think, the observer role sometimes happens because you have a partner who's on your board and they have a tremendous number of portfolio companies that they're on the board of. And honestly, the observer can be your best friend because it's typically an associate or a principal who's sitting in the room alongside of that partner who's likely taking notes that are sometimes more detailed than that partner. And it's really good to be able to know that you have someone who's assisting that partner in the oversight of your business. That was my role when I was in private equity and I was sitting as an observer on multiple boards. I would take the minutes for the board meetings. I would document the follow-up. I would touch base with the C-level executives, which I'm sure they really appreciated when I was 25 years old. Being like, just a reminder, you owe our partner that analysis on renewal rates. But I think it is helpful, in many respects, to have a junior person or an observer there to also be assisting. I mean, sometimes more people in the room can be helpful as long as they're not disruptive.
Great. So let's talk about managing your board. So the wisdom goes that's drilled deep into every entrepreneur's skull is never surprise your board. So what is an example of what you should not spring on your board at the meeting, and how do you avoid that?
We're out of money.
Correct.
Don't do that.
Yeah,
That's
the
just
first
a good rule
one,
of thumb.
Yeah. We hired a new member to the executive team, granted him X number of options, and we're paying him over $200,000. And you've never met him or her.
Or half of our executive team quit. Surprise.
Surprising in general.
Or our biggest client decided that they're not renewing for next year. Surprise.
So how do you deal with the bad news? What's actually a reasonable and sane way to bring that up with your board members?
I talk to my board members on a weekly basis, some of them slightly more. And that's partially a function of I'm a first-time CEO and partially a function of that's just the way I like to manage. That's very much how I manage my internal team as well. So there are never surprises because we're constantly talking about things. And this goes into a little bit of question, just spoiler alert, that we were going to talk about, is just what's the purpose of the board meeting. And so we use our board meetings as kind of a working session, a brainstorming session. There are certain things that we want to talk about. Our board makeup is not everybody is here in New York. I'm based in New York. So though I'm talking to everybody on a weekly basis, and I assume that they are talking to each other at some point, we are not all collectively talking as a body outside of that specific board meeting. So it's a good time to get everybody to have the information so that we're all solving one or two major problems or concerns at that board meeting, so there aren't surprises. Everybody's up to speed. Everybody knows what's going on, and now we're just trying to kind of bring the business to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a piece of bad news, I think it's best practice to email your board members either collectively or individually saying, I just wanted to give you an update, here's what happened, we, definitely understand the implications of this, here was the problem, here are some proposed solutions, here's how we're currently dealing with it, we'd love to get your feedback. If you'd like to hop on a call prior to the next board meeting, here are some dates and times that I'm available. Whether you do it individually with each board member or you do it collectively, sometimes, that can be better. Sometimes, it's not as helpful. But I always think it's important. As soon as something bad comes up, you have to, once you've come up with a way to deal and contain the situation, it's then good to inform your board that there is a problem or there was a problem, but it's currently being contained. And then I always believe in the feedback sandwich. Ellie and I both went to HBS, and this is one of the main things I learned from LEAD, which is always deliver anything negative sandwich between two positives. So I'll always say something like, we've had such a strong month in bookings. Unfortunately, one of our clients decided that they were going to renew at a 10% lower rate than last year. But the good news is that Kaplan actually bought more storage. So the net effect is we're actually up by 101% on renewals dollar value. And so if you feedback sandwich most negative things, I feel like people don't really remember the negative. They remember the beginning that they had. Right? Criticism to your employees too, right?
I've heard that. Yeah, it doesn't go unnoticed. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah,
you know the trick from school.
Yeah, well, no, I mean it's common sense, but it just something that Danielle said was once you kind of wrap your head around it and come up with a set of solutions, and while that's true, and that's the best outcome is, hey, this is what happened. This is actually how I'm thinking about the situation. This is the framework I'm using to think about this, and this is kind of what I think we should do in order to remedy it. I've already taken these two actions, and this is the rest of my plan. Sometimes it's not that clear cut. Sometimes it's actually, my goodness, I'm really not sure what to do, but this thing that came up is actually quite time sensitive. You can pretty easily, it's a bit of a slippery slope. in terms of I'm just going to wait and try and see if I can figure it out and then tell people later. That's when people get surprised because you're trying to figure it out and something else happens and then it gradually diminishes in your head, and you can talk yourself into it, and that's dangerous because then people get surprised, things get blown out of proportion, it can be a problem. So it's just, early is better than later, even if the solution is not necessarily perfect.
If it's not bad news, if it's just news in general, or communicating with your board members outside of the board meetings, Ellie, is there such a thing as a good rhythm, or is every company different? Every
company is different, and every kind of rapport that you have with the entrepreneur is different. So it's hard to be prescriptive. I have companies that I talk to in some way, shape, or form, usually via email, multiple times a week. I have companies that I speak to once a month. So it both depends on the stage of the company, the kind of cycle that the company's in. Are they heads down building product? And there's, not a lot of real decisions or kind of strategic direction, things that we can discuss until they get to XYZ place. Or, if they're in the middle of a fundraise, then we're really going to be talking often. So it depends both on the company itself and, kind of the style of the management team. It also depends on kind of the phase that company's in.
So when you're preparing for the board meeting and you're putting together a deck, Danielle, what do you put into the deck? What do you expect to find in there?
Yeah, I've gone through a lot of iterations with my board. If they actually watch the streaming of this, they will be nodding their heads. We finally developed a pretty good outline for the deck based on the things that they want to see. I will tell you, I didn't get it 100% right until I got a CFO. So I will say that my best hire, or one of my best hires, other than my VP of sales last year, was my CFO. He really just put a lot of professionalism and excellent reporting into our deck. But I can run through very, very quickly what my board deck looks like. So when you open the board deck, you see something called a CEO summary. That is basically my overview, my headline of every single important thing that the board should know across each business line. So for us, that would be sales number one. So they want to know bookings numbers, they want to know monthly recurring revenue, they want to know what average contract value is trending at, so all of the appropriate SaaS metrics. And then I put major deals that have closed. I talk about partnerships, customer success, marketing, product development, and then we break it out into sections. So really, after that CEO summary, if they want to see any type of detail on like actual contracts, renewals, the breakdown between new MRR or renewal MRR, they can just go into the background. They're going to get everything that they need from the CEO summary, and that should just guide the discussion. And then I have a really long appendix. That's it's a pretty long deck, I'll admit. And my appendix are my financial statements, which I don't luckily prepare anymore, and our corporate goals. I love that I did this actually because it aligns everybody. So we did some strategic planning at the end of 2014 that was basically like our big goal for the year and then sub goals and basically all of the metrics that we're going to be measuring that we hope to achieve in 2015, and then my budgets behind it. So that just always sits as the appendix in the back of the deck, so everyone is reminded, so what are the goals for 2015? Are we doing the right things? Are we moving in the right direction? So I think it's a good board deck. Hopefully my board is happy with it. I think so.
When do you do governance stuff, like option grants? Do you do it at the beginning or the end?
Oh, good question. I do it always at the end, mainly because I invite the executive team to sit in on the CEO summary. I also invite them to participate, depending on the duration of the meeting, I invite them to participate and add color in their respective sections. So if, for example, the board wants to dig in deeper into the sales section, then it's great to have my VP of sales there because he can speak to the details of maybe a specific deal that closed. Then we dismiss them, then we do exec session, and then it's over.
That's an interesting topic, actually, getting your management team members to present at the board meetings. And not everybody's born a natural presenter. So what's some tactical advice as to how do you prepare your team? Cheryl?
Yeah, we just started doing this. So it used to be that, we would just present, but now we've started to dive in and have team members actually present. So for us, we are not super dissimilar from what you do. However, we separate out. So we say, okay, this board meeting, we want to talk sales and product, for example. So we'll have those two teams there. I think it's really important. It's a skill set. You're always selling your company, whether you are in sales or not. So you have to be able to succinctly and intelligently explain what are your goals, are you meeting those goals, and just be able to have that conversation. It's a good skill set whether you're working at Sherpaa or not. So that to get people prepared, because not everybody is natural in that way, we've used consultants who have come in and kind of helped our team to learn how to be better public speakers, because I just think it's an important skill to have, and we've seen just huge leaps and bounds changes by investing in that. That's investing in your people, in my opinion.
We always do a run through. We do a run through, just make sure that everybody's on the same page on my CEO summary. I circulate everything except the exec session component, but I circulate everything to my executive team before I circulate it to the board to make sure everybody's on the same page in terms of representation. We do a quick run through, make sure everyone agrees. My exec team is amazing. I never worry about what they're going to present or what they're going to say to the board. We're very much aligned. So I think the presentation to the board, if it's misaligned, it sometimes can be a symptom of your management team not necessarily jiving and being cohesive on major things. I mean, articulate or not, whether someone phrases something in the perfect way, that doesn't matter to me whatsoever. It's, can someone, articulate what I believe to be, our vision, our strategy for executing on something. And I have every confidence in the world that my exec team members can do that, whether I prep them or not.
Well, from an investor point of view, is there such a thing as an ideal board meeting? What type of strategies lead to productive board meetings?
Yeah, there is. I mean, there are definitely board meetings that you walk out of and decide, well, we really didn't need to all be there in order to have done that, right? Like there wasn't actually any substantive discussion. We could have gone through, the material without the voiceover, without the people in the room. There wasn't really anything additive. And that does happen, and that's usually, when that happens, what it is typically the communication hasn't been great up to a board meeting. So you're going through items that people should have been up to date on in advance. Maybe you're going through financials. Maybe you're going through, specifics of other pieces of the business that aren't that are very tactical. You want to know what's happening, of course, with different important elements of the business, but it's not the best use of that 2 or 3 hours of time to go into detail on each and every one. I like, cycling through, okay, we're going to have, the VP of marketing come in and give an update on marketing this time, and next time maybe it's your CTO, or it's going to change over time. The best board meetings, kind of run through the items that are tactical but need to get covered at the beginning. If it's option grants and different governance items that are easy to tick off, I actually like to do that at the start, because otherwise it gets punted and it never gets discussed, and you run out of time and you end up doing it all via email, which can be fine. I mean, I've got companies that do it both ways. It's not a big deal either way, but it's nice if you can tick it off at the beginning, just check it off and move on. And it also helps you feel like you're making progress and like rocking through an agenda. And then I like to have or I find, some of the most productive sessions we've had, try and tackle a few items well. Right, you're not trying to go over 15 items. That's just when you're cycling through pages. You're trying to, maybe you go through an overview at the beginning, but everyone should be up to speed. Everyone should have gone over the materials. Everyone should know what's in there. So if there are specific questions and areas that people want to dig into, you can do that then. But you shouldn't be going through page by page, line by line for those items that you're, kind of giving an update on or a summary on. So, ideally there's maybe one or two kind of strategic questions about, the business or where you're going, or maybe it's pricing strategy, maybe it's user acquisition, maybe it's, fundraising, maybe it's strategic options. They very much vary, but trying to tackle a few things deeply rather than kind of crank through 15 tends to be a lot more productive.
To be able to have a productive board meeting like the one you guys just discussed, how do you make sure that your board members walk in the door with the right level of preparation, that they read, they get the materials? I mean, Cheryl, what do you think leads to success
giving them
there?
Time to digest the materials. So I typically send between 4 and 5 days in advance at minimum. Yeah. We have a super busy, I know that at least one of my board members sits on a lot of boards, and he's actually not in New York. So when he's in New York, I know that his schedule is, I'm going to like 15 different board meetings. I assume he's getting all of these board decks. So I want to make sure he's had the time and can really digest everything that we're doing. So we try to give it out in advance. And then again, just going back to having those conversations outside of the board meeting means that they are already at a level of preparation before they even get that board deck. And exactly like Ellie said, I mean, we sort of tackle 1 to 2 things that we want to use as a brainstorming session, bless you, or, solving problems. So, I will get that out at the head. Here's the deck. These are the things we want to talk about. And I do give them homework. So I say, if these are the 2 things that we want to talk about, please come to the table with like 3 ideas around these things. Or I'd love a few examples of how some of your other companies have tackled that, just so that we can have substantive discussion and we're using our time, everybody's time wisely.
I love that. I'm going to do that now. I actually thought of something while I was on this panel that I actually don't do, but I think I should start doing. So we send it out like 48 hours in advance. We try to. Sometimes happens. Sometimes like 36. But I actually just thought of, it would be kind of cool to put just my CEO summary in the body of the email with like the agenda items, like, this is what happened, this is going to be the first page, so they can scroll through it on their phone, and then like, here's what I want to talk about, boom, boom. And I never thought about giving them homework, but I guess I could do that. Yeah. And then that way, they could read the summary, see what I want to talk about, and then just add to the agenda if they feel like there's anything else to discuss.
Totally.
I'm going to try that.
One big thing we have in our deck, by the way, that we do that's somewhat similar to what you have, is we have our goals set out by department, by quarter. And I have it, it's super visual. And so it's basically anything in red means we are not going to hit that this quarter, something's going on, it's not going to happen. Yellow is like, it might happen, and green is it's definitely going to happen. So it's just this very sort of arresting one slide. And I always send that in advance as well and sort of put that at the top and say, these are the 2 departments that we were going to have present, but based on these goals, if you want to switch it around, and just kind of being fluid that way, because I might think you want to talk about product, but if you're seeing 2 things that are in the yellow that you really want to discuss, let's switch it up. So that's a good cue as well. Great.
So, Danielle, you're at the board meeting. What do you do when you fundamentally disagree with a board member, when you think the advice is just fundamentally wrong?
Storm out.
Danielle is not shy.
I'm not shy, but I'm very respectful. Obviously everybody gives advice in the context of their experience, in the context of, where they are that day. And you just never know where people are coming from. Maybe they had, an awful board meeting with another company before they're sitting down with you, and that's, impacting them. I did learn a good skill from one of my early seed investors, which is when someone tells you something that you disagree disagree with or you don't think is very intelligent, just nod and say, well, I never really thought about it in that way, and then just pause. So that way you can not, obviously just come out and disagree with them outright. But there have been very few occasions where I haven't thought that the input of one of my board members was sound. Maybe it wasn't necessarily something that I agreed with in that moment, but I understood their point of view. And so, of course, the only thing you can do is say, listen, I acknowledge where you're coming from. I understand why you think that way, but me, based on running the business every single day and seeing something different, has led me to a different conclusion. Let me present you with the data, let me present you with the facts that substantiate how I feel, and why don't we revisit this after you've reviewed that? Or why don't we revisit that after you've had a chance to discuss this with other board members? It has been extremely rare for the entire board to disagree with me and for me to be standing solo. I had a very recent experience where there was just a minor disagreement where one of my board members didn't see things the same way that my other board member saw it and the way I saw it. And then during the board meeting, it was very easy then to reconcile that because everyone else was on the same page. We got the other board member on our page, and it was good. But I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky because I think the role of a board member is something, Ellie was talking about earlier. It's for governance, it's for checks and balances, it's to, help you with strategic decisions, but it's not to operate the business. I mean, any board member, that's a red flag. Any board member that's like, I disagree with you, and you can't do something that's based on tangible evidence and gets involved in that manner is not a good board member.
No. And anyone even who views their kind of input or feedback as prescriptive, like, and this obviously is what you were therefore going to do. That's just a bit ridiculous. But you do see it happen, and you see that transition for some people be challenging. And in that case, the other board members and the CEO really need to push back. Because that's just not. When you don't have the context, you need to understand, your point of view, their point of view, and the fact that they've got a lot more context than you. So oftentimes it's asking questions to understand all the elements before just coming out and having an opinion that's kind of coming out of left field is just disruptive and is one of the ways that you can derail an entire hour of a conversation.
Well, should a CEO be asking for feedback from the board, and should the board be providing it?
That's kind of a separate question, yeah. So, oftentimes when boards do have executive session, that's exactly what that is, which is, kind of a time for feedback both ways, or, were there things that you wanted to discuss that you didn't want to discuss with the full management team, and we as a group also wanted to talk to you about XYZ, so that's usually a good forum for that, but, people use it in different ways, and I have some companies who are that I work with who are, always want to know how they're doing, how they're doing in comparison to other people, things that they aren't doing that they should be doing, and I'm happy to do that. But I have others who are, kind of staying in their lane and doing their thing, and happy to do that, and I'm fine with it.
Cheryl, you talked about sending your board members away with homework. Can you talk more about it? Like, how do you really get value out of that, and what do you assign people to do?
Yeah, I think you have to be reasonable, right? Like, they have a lot going on, so I'm not sending them away with homework each time. But it's more about just preparedness and also just what do you actually need. And they're there not just to sit in a board meeting however many times a year just to run through, information. That's not the purpose. And so I really view us as we're all a collective team. If our company does well, we all do well. And so I'm working every single day to make that happen. And here's how you can be helpful, whether that's giving feedback when we need it, whether that's, can you connect us to a company because we think that they would be really helpful for whatever reason, or, can you come to the table? We're having this problem. Can you come to the table with a couple of ideas? It's nothing huge. It's not taking up a ton of their time, but it's just so that we can all get together and sort of be more informed and come to the table that much ahead in the conversation.
Yeah, so I love the idea beforehand. I don't have a lot of companies that do that, actually. But afterward, there should be somebody, whether it's usually someone different than who's ever taking minutes, but isn't always, who is keeping track of, what are the action items that came out of this meeting. And I think it's great to then circulate that broadly so that everyone knows what it is that, was discussed, that they signed up to do, or they have, taken on a certain responsibility. It can be really nice, particularly if it's for a series of connections and people have signed up for different ones, to do it in a kind of shared doc of some sort. Largely, it's just another way to make sure that it stays kind of top of mind. A little peer pressure never hurt anybody. So seeing that there's of the 3 board members who aren't management team members, you've got your initials by a certain number, and somebody's already finished all of theirs. That's good. You should foster that, absolutely. There's no reason you shouldn't use that.
Great. So I think we have time for one more question, and I wanted to visit just the slightly different board to wrap up, which is the advisory board. I know, Cheryl, you guys don't have an official one. Danielle, you guys do, right? So can you guys talk about sort of how that came about? How do you think of the advisory board vis-a-vis maybe the board of directors, the topics that perhaps different than the sort of forums that are different?
Yeah, very, very different. So our advisory board is 100% practitioners. So these are influencers. One could even call them luminaries in the talent acquisition industry. These are people who are extremely visible, social. When they speak, other people listen. They are constantly on the pulse of everything that's new regarding talent acquisition trends, challenges, strategies, tactics. They're incredible. So we brought on first a lead advisor. His name is Bill Borman. We actually had an advisory board summit a couple weeks ago, so this is very much on the top of my mind. So first we brought on a lead advisor who was very well known in the industry, and then he asked members of his social group and his connections who were also at leading organizations or great consultants who had led enormous talent acquisition teams at NPR, at Zappos, to be on our advisory board. Actually, one of the members of our advisory board I brought on because he was the former head of talent at Zappos, which has been a client of ours for 3 years, and he couldn't be a member of our advisory board when he was at Zappos because it would have been a conflict of interest, but now he's the director of recruiting at Eventbrite, so that was awesome. So we brought him on board. But this board is very, very different. They don't have anything to do with governance or my compensation, luckily, or the audit, or even like strategic, product or sales issues. They are really there to provide advice definitely on product roadmap, to be the end user so we can pick their brain about things that they're seeing in the market, about the competitive landscape, about what they'd like to see as a practitioner in our product. We are paying them for blog posts and for content, for them to write for us. But most importantly, it's their influence, it's their presence, it's their ability to advocate and give the stamp of approval and introduce us to their friends who are in the industry. That's been really impactful. I think people are very impressed to see people like that on our advisory board, and they're like, yes, if I had a choice between going to take the interview or any other HR software technology, I want to be, using the software that all of the cool kids are using. And so we just put an advisory board together of brilliant, cool kids that everybody listens to.
So I would just say, sounds like Danielle actually really uses her advisory board, which makes her in the vast minority. If you're going to go through the machinations of putting together an advisory board, have some milestones in place, have very specific things that you're expecting from your set of advisors, and if it doesn't work out, have a pretty easy way to kind of terminate the relationship. I find a lot of the time advisory board members end up on a slide somewhere, and maybe once a year you have a 15-minute check-in with them, and that's as a matter of when you're an early stage startup and coming out for financing and put those names and those pictures on that advisory board. Make sure they really are, make sure they really have an opinion, and make sure they really know what's going on. More often than not, they don't, and it is an easy phone call to make.
Great. Let's take some questions from the audience. Yes. Oh, go ahead. Yes.
Yes. How often do you meet with your boards? What's the typical, both the advisory as well as your board?
Our board meets every other month. We're early though. We're super early stage. So, yeah.
But that's only 6. I mean, I've got actually right at A, usually it's 8. Oh. I have one company who wants to meet every month. Which is fine because they're in New York, so that makes it easy. And then I have others that are a little bit later stage and are based somewhere a little bit further away that make it difficult. So we'll end up doing kind of quarterly. So it'll be a quarterly in person, but there are, it'll be at least 6, and then we all go out of our way to have, kind of individual one-on-ones at a pretty regular cadence with that company.
I can speak to the advisory board since I think they covered it on the board of directors. But we just did our first advisory board summit where we got every single advisory board member in a room. I think we're going to do that on an annual basis because one of our advisors is in Australia. So it's a little bit more difficult. But he's part of Universum, and they have a New York City office, and maybe we could do that more frequently. But I think it's really important that you, like Ellie pointed out, that you define what you need from those advisors, and you're constantly communicating with them. So I have no doubt going forward, if I was going to think about our cadence, we would be having at least 3 to 4 major meetings with select subsets of our advisors per quarter, whether it's around product strategy. We're trying to create these task forces where certain advisors are very interested in certain areas or modules that we're releasing, and so we don't want to have too many cooks in the kitchen when we're doing product prioritization, but we do want to have industry experts in that review. So maybe 2 advisors on a committee. So it's like some version of a committee inside of an advisory board that are specifically focused on various product features or functionality. So we'll be doing that as well as just going through marketing strategy probably once a quarter, redefining what the calendar is for those advisors to deliver, whether it's blog posts or be a speaker on our webinar. And then obviously what's a continuous thing and an ongoing thing for the board is just introductions. So being able to just circulate a Google Doc and say, these are our top prospects, these are the companies that we've reached out to. If any of our advisors know people at these companies, here's who we've been speaking to. If we've spoken to them, here are the next steps. And if you can help us in any way, please let us know. And one of the most brilliant things that I actually read about an advisory board and trying to do something like that was keeping it very transparent. So you actually create this competition among advisors, or you could do this with board members as well, which is you literally have your prospect list, and right next to it, the advisor has to put their name. So then you can start to track it, and you can actually send out an email over time that says, thank you, Stacy, for making 6 introductions in Q1. Here's the tally for everybody else. Lars, 0. Todd, 0. Bill, 0. It's like, we really appreciate it, Stacy. And then just letting them do their work, right? That's how you motivate people, sort of, right?
That's exactly what I said.
Very well. Shane, yes.
How many advisors, or how large is the advisory board, and how are you compensating them generically?
Yeah, we have, I believe it's now 6 members of the advisory board, and we give them a piece of the pie. We give them some options.
With a vesting schedule.
Of course, yes, of course, with a vesting schedule. Although the one thing about advisory board vesting versus employee vesting is that some advisors will push for a different type of vesting schedule. So what I've seen is that because in an earlier stage business, as well as in the beginning, you front end a lot of work, so you need more from advisors in the beginning. So what I have seen is that versus a 4-year vesting schedule with a 1-year cliff, like a lot of New York City startups, that's our standard vesting schedule at our company. What a lot of advisors ask for or do is they ask for maybe it's a 3-year vesting schedule, and that way it's sort of giving them a little bit of extra for the fact that or you have more vesting in the first year and a little bit less vesting in years 2 and 3, just because it does require a lot of work in the beginning.
That's a good point. I see 2 years also.
Okay. In the back.
Can you describe the characteristics of the people that are on your board? Like, what do you look for that really kind of stands out for you? Because I would assume that you would want people who knew your industry really well, but that you've explained that that's actually what your advisory board is purposeful for. So can you explain then what the characteristics should be for your board of directors?
Yeah. Sometimes you can't pick your board of directors. Like, you can pick your advisory board. So let me sort of take it a step back. Most of the time when you have board members, the role of a board of directors is, again, the checks and balances. They are really they're the gatekeepers in many respects because they provided you with capital. So the requirement for a lot of funds that deploy a lot of capital in an early stage business is that they have a board seat so that they can have voting rights, so they can have certain information rights, veto rights. There are a series of rights that board members have. What you can do is choose your investors wisely, choose the partner wisely that ends up submitting a term sheet. So, I did a very good job in selecting our institutional investors, which is why I have wonderful board members, because the partners that provided me with the term sheets and the way I structured my round of financing worked well for me because the people that were behind the money were fantastic. And so it is by the nature that they invested in my business that they understood my industry. Not only did they understand my industry, well, typically they do. Some VC investors don't, but for me, it's very important that when I speak in acronyms and when I, talk about my industry and I talk about the idiosyncrasies of it, that the investor that is working with us gets that. And so that was a prerequisite for me. So just by definition, the 2 partners that are on my board have that background. And then, the other board member was essentially my founding partner, the person who wrote me my first $25,000 check, who has, led me through ups and downs, who helped me find, our first, software engineer. So he's someone who's, always been on my side because we've grown through, nothing to something together. And he's invested 10 times the amount that he invested when he first met me. So that's been great. It is that independent board member who I think needs to now be juxtaposed against the advisory board, which is now all of the practitioners, which is going to be actually more impactful for my business and for the other exec team members versus for me. So maybe selfishly, I want that independent board member to be someone who has been me, someone who has founded a company from nothing and has led it to a successful exit while maintaining sanity and maintaining a relationship with the board and done it with some type of elegance, class, and has managed to weather the storm very effectively. And so that is who I'm looking for, and I will find that person, hopefully.
Let's do one last question.
what is the best advice you ever got and the worst advice you ever got?
Best advice is don't listen to everybody's advice.
That's true. That is true. Yeah, that is true. And also never surprise your board was a good first piece of advice, having been a new CEO. Worst piece of advice. It's a good question.
I don't know. I think it's kind of in one ear, out the other if you think it's a bad piece of advice.
That's true.
I think
You know it when you hear it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just give advice because my best advice is, this is a long road. Starting a business, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so the thing that has held me up and sustained me has been to choose wisely the people you surround yourself with. And that pertains to everything. It pertains to the people that you hire. It pertains to the people you put on your board of directors, your advisory board, your friends, your supporters, your romantic partners, everybody, your attorneys, your vendors, your suppliers, your clients, everybody. I think that the most important thing I've learned is that this is, you're in it for the long haul, and there are going to be a lot of challenges, but if you surround yourself with good people who want the best for you and have the right intentions, it will be a much easier road to travel.
Great. Join me in thanking the panelists.